Hello everyone and welcome back to The Dark Duo. I am Kosette.
And I am Ty.
Thank you to all of our listeners for listening. We want to ask a huge favor. If you're watching on YouTube, could you please subscribe, comment, and like? And then if you're on Spotify or Apple, make sure to turn on your notifications and to follow the podcast. And if you would, leave some comments, do all the good things. We're just trying to get this word around for the podcast so that we can get our stories to bigger audiences. Also, if you'll follow the Instagram at @thedarkduo_podcast so that you can see all of our case visuals. All right, Ty, is there anything that you want to add from your week? Anything you want to tell listeners?
Nothing too crazy. Just Cozy and I have been sick, so we have been resting a lot this week and eating a lot of ramen noodles. But just another thing off the top of my head is, I'll piggyback off of you, is go ahead and share this podcast with everyone. We want everyone to hear our fun little podcast. All
right, with that, let's go ahead and jump back into our fairy tales for the month. So this is our third one of the month, and this one's a trip to say the least. I don't think I realized how intense that this case was going to be and how much information it had. So when I first started doing all my research, I had so much more than I thought. So this episode is a little bit longer, so sorry about that. But it's all critical information, and I felt like I tried to get what was important into the story. So let's go ahead and start with some sources. The main source that I used was The Honeymoon Murder by Joshua Hammer. He did an incredible job at laying out this story. So if you want to go and read more and want to follow up, 100% recommend his source. It was amazing. I will also link all these in the comments, but I also used BBC News UK, News24, theindependent.com, and theweek.com. Trigger warnings for this one. We are going to talk about murder, attempted rape, attempted suicide, mental illnesses, and some sexual material. This is a family-friendly podcast, so maybe 13 and up, but whatever you seem suitable for your children. But we try not to go into too much details of stuff. If you want to look up or have questions of what something is, especially this one, there's some things that might not know what it is. If you want to look it up, great, go for it. We will not go into detail of it though, just because we want to keep this somewhat clean and somewhat family friendly if we can. So let's start. I can attest that getting married is magical. Your day is surreal and you dream of it from the time that you're a little girl. Maybe not so much for a boy, I don't know. I mean, as a girl you do, but did you, Ty?
I've always thought about my wedding day, but it's a long day. But it is a magical day, to say the least. You're with your partner that you're going to spend the rest of your life with, so it's a good day.
I feel like you more so just wonder who you're going to marry. Who's going to be your person that you're stuck with forever? Not stuck, but who you're going to be with forever. I always remember when I was little wishing I knew who I would marry. I never thought I'd end up with Ty. I had a crush on him before he liked me, but life has a funny way of bringing the person to you that you end up with.
Yes, it does.
So, 72% of people say that their wedding day is one of the best days of their life despite all the stress. Your wedding day is a real-life fairy tale with your Prince Charming or your princess. This day leads you into the honeymoon phase, and not only your honeymoon phase, but your actual trip of your honeymoon, which for us, I thought it was fun.
Oh, it was a great time.
We went to Cabo, and it was way fun.
An amazing time.
So this is supposed to be the best time of a newlywed's life. You finally get to be with your person for a week. You get all the way from all the stresses of wedding planning. You finally have everything done. You're good. You can just chill and be with your new spouse with the life you started. So today's case is not going to be that way though. Today we will discuss how a fairy tale beginning of a life together turned into a real life nightmare for Shien and Anni Dewani. Let's go ahead and rewind the clock a little over 14 years ago. The day is October 19th, 2010. Which is Anni's fairy tale day. Shien and Anni had 300 guests gathered on a lawn on the Powai Lake, which was a reservoir in the hills that was just outside of Mumbai, India. Anni was carried down a path on a golden sedan chair resting on the shoulders by her uncle, her brother, and her 2 cousins. She walked to the manned map where Shien was waiting for her. Her father, Binod, had grown up in Uganda as a member of the country's close-knit Indian community. He watched the wedding proudly, and he was thrilled that Anni had decided to be married in Mumbai. What led us to this day, though? Let's go back and let's meet Anni and Shien before this day. Anni was 28. She was super bright. She was outgoing. She's beautiful. Her pictures, she's literally stunning. She had graduated college, and then she moved back home to work in marketing for the mobile phone maker Ericsson. Her father had bought her a new Volvo and a 1-bedroom apartment in a Tony neighborhood of the city. Anni wanted her life to be perfect, and her father wanted to help make this happen. When she was looking for a husband during her mid-20s, she did so with haste and very particularly. She would fly to London to stay with wealthy relatives, and then on the weekends, she would spend her time shopping and socializing, which sounds like a great time, I think. She had already decided that her husband would be Indian and felt that London gave her the best prospects other than those in Stockholm. Annie's aunt had noticed that Shien was at some parties in London. He was clean cut, he had good looks, he was wealthy, he had a good pedigree, and the aunt had obtained the phone number from a mutual acquaintance. She then arranged an informal run-in for Shien and Annie at a coffee bar. They hit it off, and in September of 2009, they went on their first date to the performance of The Lion King. After another day of dinner at the Continental Park Lane Hotel, Annie had called her aunt and she said, "I met a guy and I'm going to meet him again." These two had led very similar lives. Shrien's family, like Annie's, was Gujarati, and his mother had fled Amman's Uganda for England. His father had opened a pharmacy in Bristol and a nursing home that had grown into a chain for healthcare facilities for elderly patients. Shien had graduated from a prep school in Bristol and studied accounting at the University of Manchester. He then traveled to Ghana, where he spent many months teaching English and mathematics, so he's smart. He then traveled to London and had worked for the accounting firm Deloitte, and he left within the year to help manage the fast-growing family business that was known as PSP Healthcare. With his brother Priyan, before his 30th birthday, he was a millionaire. People thought he was a show-off, but he was also kind and generous, and he had a very good sense of humor. Annie said that this was probably what captured her the most, was his sense of humor. A few months into the relationship, Annie was smitten by him. In February of 2010, she gave up her job in Stockholm and decided to move to Luton, just north of London. That spring of 2010, Annie's parents then traveled to Bristol to meet Shrien's parents, who were staying in an apartment that they owned in that city. When Annie's parents arrived, all of the Dewanis had BMWs, they had Mercedes, they all had Porsches, and then they all had vanity license plates, and they were all parked out front.
They were living the life.
Yeah. I know Ty wants a Porsche, so.
I do.
They had lots of them. So, this was when Vinod realized just how wealthy that the Dewanis were. This visit, though, sealed the deal for Vinod's approval of their relationship and their marriage. After this trip, Shrien took Annie on a private plane to Paris, and then they went to the restaurant, the Hotel Ritz, and a waiter presented on a silver platter a $40,000 diamond engagement ring on a bed of roses.
Gosh dang, that's an expensive ring.
And that was back in 2010, so that's like worth $58,000 now. So pretty pricey ring, but she of course accepts. I mean, who wouldn't? It's a $40,000 engagement ring. Yeah, I totally would have.
Okay, you gold digger.
No, I'm just saying. It probably was a really nice ring. Anyways, this leads us to the beginning of how the story started of the wedding day. The fairy tale beginning where we started. The day Annie had dreamed of, and it was as perfect as she had imagined. It was exactly how she wanted, and she was so happy that she was able to marry Shrien. The next morning after their wedding, Annie ran into her sister Amy, who had asked where they were honeymooning. Annie had laughed and said that Shrien had made plans, but he's being very vague about where their destination was. Annie gave Amy a hug and told her that she would call when she gets back. This is the last time that Amy would ever talk to Annie. On Friday, November 12th, Annie and Shrien arrive at Cape Town International Airport from Johannesburg. They had previously been at Kruger National Park, and they had been game watching, which had left them exhausted. So Shrien began looking for a taxi and flagged down a Volkswagen Chiron minivan. Their driver was Zola Tongo. He was a strong-built man, but he had a little bit of a chubby face, as he was described. He had been a former insurance consultant, and he had recently taken up being a full-time limousine driver in Cape Town for a tour company. He was currently supporting his mother and his 14-year-old sister, along with a wife and 5 children. This led him to start freelancing with the company's minivan during the off hours to get more of a side income, because he just wasn't quite making ends meet. The 3 of them all set off for the Cape Grace Hotel, which was a 5-story brick and stone red-tiled roof rise, and it also had a private marina. The hotel was in the wealthy part of the city. Let's give a quick background of the city so I can lay out the town that we'll be talking about and where our story takes place. So the town was a mixed population, and in the 1950s, the people who were poor were forced onto the older side of the town, and this created it so that the wealthy people built in the now rich area. The others were forced onto the outskirts of town, and these became squatter camps, so probably not very safe. And this created a segregated town, and the wealthy districts became where the rich would go. And the outskirts of town is where all your people that weren't rich would go. This created it so the outskirts weren't very safe, and this meant that after dark, the visitors would return to the wealthy areas and did not go after dark in the outskirts of town. Cape Town was one of those areas. It was also one of the world's most violent cities despite all their tourism. It had an unflagged epidemic of murder, rape, carjacking, assaults, and home invasions. The area called Guggle Ethel, which averaged over 140 murders a year. So, Tongo, after picking up the Dewanis, he drove right past this area without stopping. He knew these statistics, wanted to keep his tourists safe, didn't want anything to happen to him. So the drive went well, and Shien and Annie loved how personable he was. Before he dropped them off, Shien had made plans for the same driver to pick them up the next night for dinner plans. The couple had spent the next day by the hotel pool, relaxing. They then got ready and met Tongo at 7:30. When he arrived, Shien and Annie climbed into the backseat of the minivan and they set off. They got onto the N2, which is basically their highway or their main road. Shien had a reservation at the 96 Winery Road, which was one of the province's most acclaimed restaurants. Then, on the drive, Annie and Shien decided that they actually weren't that hungry. Tongo offered a more downscale restaurant. They had some good Asian food. They agreed that sounded super good, so they pulled off the highway around 9:15. They merged onto a 2-lane side road that was in the windy, swampy lowlands that headed to the coast. The restaurant was in the resort town of Strand, which was a 30-minute drive southeast of Cape Town. The windows of the restaurant had a view of the sea, and after they ate some curry and sushi, they decided to go stroll the beach. At about 10:15, they hopped back into Tongo's van, and he turned back onto the N2 to head back towards Cape Town. They were supposed to go to the waterfront district for a drink, but Annie had actually wanted to go see, like, real Africa. She didn't feel like she'd seen anything yet. So Tongo veered onto the exit ramp at Borchard's Quarry Road, and the minivan turned onto Clipfoten Road and then made a right on Gugethulu, the deserted main avenue of NY112. Tongo then halted at a stop sign at an intersection that was beside an apostolic church and a primary school. Suddenly, a man was hammering on the windshield with a pistol, so hard that Shien thought it was going to break. Then, just as fast as they appeared, a man shoved Tongo into the passenger seat and took the wheel. Another 2 men piled into the back seat with a gun and sat right next to Shien and Annie. The Volkswagen then sped away and pulled into a gas station. They forced Tongo out of the minivan and then pulled back onto the N2 away from Cape Town to go deeper into Cape Flats, so our not safe area. Yeah. They sped down the highway, turning off at Kyalisha, and drove for 10 more minutes. The driver then stopped and shouted at Shien to get out, get out. Annie and Shien begged to not be separated, but the hijackers did not care. They put a gun to Shrien's ear and pulled the trigger. Shien held on to Annie and said, "If you're going to hurt her, then let us go," to which they then forced Shien out of the minivan and sped off with Annie in the back. This left her alone with the 2 gunmen in the back seat. At 11 p.m. on Saturday night, Vinod hears his phone ringing, and it was Shrien's father, who had said that he had just talked to Shien and Annie had been kidnapped. He had tried to remain calm. He said they could go to South Africa and pay the people who kidnapped Annie what they wanted. Then the phone rang again, but it was Shien who had called him this time. He said, "Dad, I could not take care of your daughter." Shien seemed in great distress, and Vinod tells him not to worry. He will get there as soon as he can. Which, that'd be so scary. Like, imagine you having to call my dad on our honeymoon.
Yeah, that's terrifying. And tell him that I wasn't able to take care and protect your daughter.
Yeah, that'd be terrifying. Not a call I'd want to make.
No, absolutely not.
The next morning, on November 14th, Annie was found by the police at 7:50 a.m. She was found dead in the back of the car that they were driving the night before. The car was found in Cape Town, and Annie was found with a bullet wound to the neck. When Vinod arrived to Cape Grace, it wasn't until after midnight until he saw Shien that he gave him a hug, but Shien seemed distant. The next day, on Tuesday morning, Vinod made plans to go to the morgue and ask Shien if he wanted to come. He declined and said that he couldn't come. Keep that in your mind, because there's something kind of weird about that.
Okay.
Which, just as I said, it's a little odd, but I'm not going to judge. I have no idea where my headspace would be if I lost you on our honeymoon. Vinod assumed that this was because he was too grief-stricken to come. He went with police and identified his daughter, Annie. The next day, Vinod, Prakash, and Shien flew to Bristol with Annie's body so that they could prepare for the funeral. The police had a force in South Africa known as the Hawks, which was basically their FBI unit. It covered high-profile cases, organized crimes, all those things. Even though Cape Flats saw more than 1,000 murders a year, they relied on their tourism for money, and they would not let the case of a wealthy foreigner go uninvestigated. The day that everyone flew to Bristol with Annie's body was the day that the police knocked on the door of their first suspect. The police were first looking for a man named Ulele Menjeni. His fingerprints had been lifted from the minivan that Zola Tongo had driven. This man quickly confessed to his involvement in the killing of Annie. He also quickly turned in his accomplice as well, which was a man named Mao. The officers drove with Ulele to half a dozen shacks in the township so that they could find the man, but the search came up empty-handed. They then brought Ulele into an interrogation office where he was interrogated for several hours while the police still hunted for Mao. He was then found 2 days later. His real name was Mizawama Doda Lennox Kuibe, and he was Olele's neighbor. After his arrest, he also quickly admitted to his involvement in the crime and offered to give the police even more details to the crime. Then, on November 20th, the police issued the warrant for a third suspect, which was, who do you think?
The driver.
Yep, Zola Robert Tongo. Tongo went to a prosecutor on November 22nd to likely enter a plea bargain so he could get a less than sentence, which if he gave information in the exchange for this case, it would give him less sentence, right? So this case seemed pretty open and shut with all three of our suspects, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well,
yeah.
There's something no one saw coming. According to Tongo's confession, he stated that after the drive from the airport to Cape Grace Hotel, Shien took him aside and wondered if he could take a client off of his hands.
What the heck?
Tongo said, I know he wanted a woman killed, but I wasn't sure who. Shien had been willing to pay the killers 15,000 rand, which roughly $2,200 in US money, and he had also included the planning and carrying out of the murder. Shien also told Tongo he could get an additional 5,000 rand, so roughly $730 for a finder's fee, which $2,900, not that much for a hire to kill.
No.
That's not even like
cheap.
anything. Yeah. So the murder plot would take place barely 24 hours, even from this beginning, like talking and planning, to the initial execution. Tongo said that he had first reached out to a middleman who was the hotel receptionist. He then led Tongo to a small-time drug dealer and to a house party DJ. Then at noon the next day, Shien and Tongo met to outline the crime. Tongo had recalled the hijacking, which would be simulated, and that after the hijacking, both Shien and himself would be ejected from the vehicle unharmed, and the other men would kill Annie. That Saturday afternoon, Tongo met with Kuibe and the accomplice that they drove around and discussed the details of the killing, such as how it would be carried out, how they'd get paid, and then they decided where this crime was going to take place. So they decided that it would happen at the intersection of the NY 112 and the NY 108. Then during dinner at the Surfside restaurant, Tongo took Shien aside to see if everything was arranged. Tongo said that it was and that they were set to go. Tongo then texted Shien to not forget about his money, and Shien assured him that it was in an envelope in a pouch behind his front seat. Then, when they arrived at the intersection, Menjeni put himself in front of the vehicle, and Kuibe was at the door with the firearm pointed to Tongo and was told to unlock the doors. They climbed in, and the Dewanis were told to lie down. Tongo said that when Kuibe started to drive off, Shien and I pretended we were being hijacked. I knew that they would not harm Shien, and we knew that we would get dropped off later. He also admitted that I knew Annie would be kidnapped, robbed, and murdered when Shien was dropped off.
That's terrible.
Yeah. After this statement, police were able to get a confession from Kuibe that corroborated what Tongo had said. The only difference in the story was the actual shooter. Tongo stated that it was Kuibe, and Kuibe had stated that it was Menjeni. So the gun was branded as a Norinco pistol, which I don't know a thing of guns. Ty, heard of it?
I have not.
I have a picture with all of our pictures, but it pretty much just looks like a handgun.
Okay, yeah, it's a pistol.
Yeah. So according to Kuibe's account, Menjeni was in the front passenger seat and fired a single shot to Annie. According to the autopsy, the bullet had grazed her thumb and severed 2 major veins in her neck. With my anatomy knowledge, I'm assuming these were probably her internal and external jugular, but that's just my guess. But those are your 2 major veins in your neck, so just a guess. But the bullet also perforated her spinal cord, and then it exited out her back, and she bled to death in seconds. So pretty brutal.
That's terrible.
Yeah, sad. So Kuibe had said that she was scared and nervous, and he had got out to feel around for the casing money, and he had chucked the casing down a drain. The police were able to recover this from the drain and then found the gun in the shack of a resident who had it for safekeeping for Kuibe. 2 days before Tongo's court appearance, he then struck a deal with the provincial government to plead guilty to murder, aggravated robbery, and kidnapping. He also agreed to testify against the others that were involved. In return, he would get a lessened sentence of 18 years prison with the possibility of parole after 12 years served, which normal South African sentence for this crime would be life in prison without possibility of parole. So definitely smaller sentence. Shien's father-in-law, Vinod, started to question a few things though. From the very beginning, she didn't feel as though Shien's story added up. But his wife was angry and that she had even questioned about it, so he just let it be. However, over time, little things started to eat at him. We'll just go through some of these things. So the night before Annie's funeral, Shien had hosted a pizza party, which Vinod found odd. I mean, I guess maybe you could say it was like a party of like remembrance, but I know if Ty died, I'd be sulking in my house, probably eating ice cream with my 2 dogs cuddling me.
I know, like a pizza party, that's more for like a celebration.
Yeah, weird, kind of odd.
Yeah, that's odd.
But oh well, you know, some people do odd things. So then he had also fought with Amy over which dress Annie should wear for the funeral, which I don't feel like that one's quite as odd. I mean, I'd want you to pick a dress over my immediate family.
Yeah.
But I also don't have sisters, like I have all brothers, so. Yeah. But I feel like you would know my style better, so I feel like that one's not too odd.
Yeah, that's not bad.
No. But after he had said no to the dress that Amy picked out, he then blocked her from speaking at the funeral service and said she was not allowed to speak. That one's definitely odd. I mean, I'm going to play devil's advocate again. Who knows how you'll react to grief? Grief is super different with every person, just due to people's chemical makeup, how they have predisposition mental illnesses, like if you have heredity to mental illnesses, the environment that you're in, all your psychological factors. But all these factors for grief can also immediately change when something traumatic happens, such as losing a wife or watching your wife get kidnapped and then killed. But enough of my psychology info for you. So I guess my point is he did go through something traumatic, so it's hard to tell like what's odd and what's not, like how you'd react to if I was killed on our honeymoon.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the Dewani's family hired a well-known London press agent who was named Max Clifford to handle all of their press. Shien's brother told all the Hindochas that they needed to sign a press agreement to not comment to the media about the case unless they had talked to Clifford first, but Vinod refused. So at this point, Shien had recalled the events to several reporters, newspapers, police, and everyone who would ask. However, Vinod had begun to question some of his facts due to inconsistencies. This included Shien reporting to the Daily Mail that it was Annie who wanted to visit the township. Then he later recounted to the Sun the following week that Tongo had given them the idea to go see some African dancing. Shien had also reported that he was thrown out of the vehicle's rear door when the car was moving, but then in the Sun he also said that they couldn't get him out because the child locks were activated. So they had to drag him out while he was struggling and screaming out the window.
So just some conflicting statements.
Yes, very conflicting. I mean, this could be explained away again with like trauma. Sometimes you block things out. You don't know what happens, you know.
Yeah.
But is it really something that innocent? I mean, some things are weird, and that's quite a few coincidences to have gotten wrong. I don't know. Another thing that's kind of odd, though, is the Daily Mail had also said that there was an unnamed source that stated that the police were a little confused as to how if either of those things happened, how did he have no injuries? He was dragged out of the car just fine. No injuries, no cuts, no anything.
No scrapes, bruises.
Yeah, which they were like, okay, that's a little weird too.
Yeah.
They should have had injuries, but there just wasn't any. Then, on December 7th, Tongo was led to the Western Cape High Court, and Vinod took his place in the upstairs to watch and hear something that makes this so heartbreaking and real. Vinod, Annie's dad, brings a picture of Annie to hold during the session because he wanted her to be close with him.
Well, that is so sad.
And he just held it in his little lap during the whole entire thing, which just makes that so real. Like, imagine, like, being in that situation.
Yeah, I don't want to imagine that.
At 9 a.m., the police led Tongo into a room. The prosecutor, Decock, had warned Vinod ahead of time that he should probably prepare for the worst. When he stood up with the signed confession in hand, everyone was on the edge of their seats waiting to hear. Tongo stated in his confession that the alleged hijacking was not in any part a hijacking, but rather a plan of deceit. Shien Dewani and Tongo had worked together to hide the truth of what really happened. And the truth was that the murder of Annie lied in the hands of her husband, Shien. The confession Tongo had given from earlier was stated here, and as Decock read the details of the murder plot, everyone was shocked. About 6 hours after a magistrate in Britain issued the warrant for Shien Dewani to be taken into custody on suspicion of conspiring to murder his wife. Which, imagine as the dad sitting there and hearing all of this, and you're just like, oh my gosh.
Yeah, the man that, you gave your daughter's hand to is the one that planned the murder.
Yeah.
On their honeymoon.
On their honeymoon, nonetheless.
Yeah, what the heck? Shien's messed up.
Yeah. So Shien surrendered, and at the South Med police station at 10:38 in Bristol, on December 7th, 2010 at 10:38 in Bristol, Shien surrendered at the South Med police station. Then, after 2 days in prison, Shien was released on a $250,000 pound bond. So this would equate about $380,000. He gave up his passport and was also tracked with an electronic ankle bracelet and then returned to his family's home. The Hindochas, so Annie's family, We're still not sure of his guilt in this crime, though. The family was also divided because they just couldn't believe that Shien would do such a heinous thing to their Annie. Something that I found interesting in this case is that the officers had taken both the brothers of Shien's, followed the drive that Annie and the killers took, and they drove them to the sandy side of the street where Shien was ejected out of the vehicle. Then they also drove them to the exact route where they stopped and fired and shot Annie. So they counted the seconds from point A to B where Shien had been kicked out and then to where Annie had eventually been killed. And they realized that Annie had spent a whole 3 minutes alone begging for her life and probably terrified. I feel like that would be so long. Think about how sometimes like when you actually count like a minute, it seems forever.
Yeah. Let alone 3 minutes alone with men and them being armed and ready to kill you.
Yes. So while Shien is at Dewani's house after bail, the police start to find evidence that substantiates the claims from Tongo. The South African police said that they were able to recover phone records between Tongo and Shien and that they did show them texting on the highway. The police also got television footage from the Cape Grace hotel lobby that was taken 3 days after the murder, and it showed that Shien was handing Tongo a white plastic package that had the 1,000 rand, which was their partial payment for him to set up the murder. These aren't even the most incriminating evidences, though, for Shien. The most incriminating piece, according to the South African police, is that Annie was not raped. Her autopsy had shown no evidence of sexual assault, which to them, they knew rape was more common than murder. So why would they separate the couple if they weren't going to rape her? The only reason that police came up with was that the murder was premeditated.
Absolutely.
The police had the evidence stacked against Shien. They kept finding things left and right to add to their repertoire as well. The police were now just missing one thing: motive. Why would Shien kill his new wife on a honeymoon, especially when everyone thought that he loved her? Ty, what do you think his motive is?
I have no idea. Maybe he had a side chick and he had to kill her because maybe she was going to find out. I don't know.
That's a good guess. Okay. Good guess.
This is deep.
We'll see. I told you, there's just so much information.
Yeah.
And it's all important. And it's kind of confusing. So hopefully it's making sense and you're like not lost. Any questions so far? Let's hurry and clear anything up if we need to.
No, okay. I think everything's pretty clear.
Okay, before you ask, no insurance policy was taken out on Annie. Everyone knows that's the number one reason that a spouse will kill his wife or husband is insurance policy. People want money. People are a little greedy. But there's not an insurance policy. There's also no will. And there's nothing that suggests that Shien would get any financial gain from Annie's death. Plus, he's already a millionaire.
Yeah, he was already well off.
Yeah, why would he need money just from her death, you know?
Yeah.
Then the bombshell came in. In December, while Shien is awaiting trial, a man named Leopolder Lester showed up to the Scotland Yard. He was a male escort from Munich. Do you know what a male escort is?
No.
It's a man who provides companionship or sexual services for a fee. So basically, he's a male prostitute.
All right, this just got nasty.
So, how's this man related to Shien? Shall we go into it?
Sure.
So, Leopold had seen Shrien's photo in the newspaper and had told police that he recognized him as a former client. So, within days, Leopold sold an interview to the Sun tabloid in which he claimed that Shien had paid him for 3 sessions of kinky sex in the months leading up to his wedding.
Oh, jeez.
So, of course, police questioned Shien, but he denies knowing Leopold, and he threatened to sue for defamation of his name. This, of course, made Leopold seem less like a credible source. He probably was just like wanting money, wanting something, you know? Then another bombshell drops. A few weeks later, a 53-year-old political aide in the parliament paid a visit to the British investigators that were working on this case. They told them that he too had had several sexual encounters with Shien. The aide said that there was a place called the Rendezvous Point that was a gay fetish club in London, and it was called the Hoist, where Shien would visit. The aide continued that Shien denied the first claims. He was enraged that he was denying his own sexuality. He told detectives that he knew Shien was a submissive who enjoyed sadomasochism and dressing up in leather. The Daily Star reported on this, and no one really believed this just because the Star and the Sun reporters weren't super reliable. But then The Guardian, which is another British newspaper, very trustable, gave credit to this story. So now it has some substance. It seems like it could have happened.
I said he had a side chick. He didn't. He had a side, not a side man. He had side men.
Yeah.
Multiple. That's disgusting.
You said side chick, and I was like, if only.
Oh.
Close, but not quite. Remember the day that Shien had said that he couldn't go to identify Annie in the morgue? And I said, put a pin in that. Let's remember that.
Yeah, it's weird.
So the day that he had declined to go to the morgue with Vinod, he had actually gone out for a haircut and to get a new suit. I mean, maybe he just wanted to look good for the funeral. I don't know.
Or look good for a man.
And guess what? Surprise, surprise, they're dating not as happily ever after as people thought. Annie would call her sister Amy, and 3 weeks before the wedding, she had said, "I'm giving back the ring and I'm not going to marry him. He is so controlling and he gets mad about petty things. He gets mad when I don't fold dirty clothes before I put them in the laundry basket.
What the heck?
He gets mad at me for eating ice cream and other sweets, and when I leave my stuff scattered in the room." Amy had chalked this up just to be some wedding nerves, and she told her it's going to be fine. If things don't work out, you can always just get a divorce. That February, the South African legal team sought Shien's extradition and told the Court of London that they had obtained an affidavit from a significant witness who had agreed that he would testify Shien was unhappy about his upcoming marriage. The witness also stated that Shien had said that even though Annie was lovely and he liked her, he could not break out of the engagement or his family would disown him. He also told the witness that he needed to find a way out of the marriage. This double life may have seemed far-fetched, but it stuck to the Hindochas. They saw as Shien being scared his family would find out that he was homosexual, and it would create quite the scandal. I mean, their family's huge in London. They're millionaires. They also figured that he had panicked and thought that the only way out was to kill Annie rather than facing the humiliation of a divorce. His family was also religious and very involved in society, so Shien could not have let it come out that he was gay. I mean, again, we're in 2010s. There's not like a super big discrimination against those who are gays, but it's also not as welcomed as it is now. And if his family's religious, the family might not be accepting depending on what his church's stances are.
For sure.
So he's kind of just in a pickle, you know?
Yeah.
On February 20th, an ambulance was called to the house of Shien's parents. Shien had taken an overdose of sleeping medication and was in serious condition. He had told the staff at the hospital that he did not want to live. Since Annie's death, he had lost 28 pounds and he was getting weaker. He was then diagnosed with severe depression and PTSD. He was then committed to the Priory Hospital in London, which was a mental health and addiction rehab center that was popular with British celebrities. 3 days later, a new headline appears on the Daily Express that states, "Why I believe Shien Dewani is innocent." This was written by Newling, who was a former writer for the Daily Express. He listed out reasons why he believed that Shien was innocent. He said, "No one knew the case as well as I do, and that the traumatized widower he met 3 months ago was turned into a killer, which he thought was unlikely. Instead, he was the victim of an injustice. He said that he was unsure what happened the night of November 13th, but Tongo was a self-confessed liar. And Tongo had admitted to obstructing justice by misleading police in exchange for having 7 years dropped off his sentence, if he gave that helpful testimony and pinned the premeditation on Shien. The other witnesses were also offered immunity if they would corroborate Tongo's testimony. The 1,000 rand that Shien had given Tongo that was caught on camera, that's also the same taxi fare from Cape Grace to Strand. And back to the hotel. That's what their fare would have been. So Newling stated that the police were angry at the crime being an issue for tourism, so they did shoddy police work, but it shouldn't have been a place that tourists get killed by their taxi drivers. In April of 2011, Shien Dewani got into a discussion with a fellow patient at the Priory Hospital, who told him that he should go to South Africa and be convicted. This resulted in him getting a psychiatric evaluation because he flipped out on him, obviously, and Shien was then developed with psychotic symptoms and then was transferred to a psychiatric unit in Kowaistoke, and then an even higher security area 2 weeks later in Bristol. While he was in treatment, government officials were fighting with his extradition in South Africa. Shien's attorney debated that if he was able to stand trial in South Africa, and said if he did, he was likely going to commit suicide. The trial of Mjene began in August of 2012, and while he had been in prison, he developed a brain tumor and had become frail. When Kuwait took the stand, they showed the videoed confession, and he told the same story that Annie's killing was a murder for hire, and told them that Mjene pulled the trigger. But Mjene still insisted that it was Kuwait who had fired the fatal shot. Still don't know who it is, you know?
Yeah.
But their stories of the final moments before Annie's death differed, and any skilled criminal attorney would have tried to poke holes in this, right? They see this differentiation, they're both there. Any skilled lawyer, is going to try and figure out, why they're different, you know?
Yeah.
However, Mjene's lawyers did no such thing and only asked a few questions on the cross-examination. The judge found Mjene guilty of premeditated murder for hire and sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. There's still a ton of inconsistency in this case, though, such as the number of guns, the seating arrangement, who pulled the trigger, and the South African authorities who were trying to quickly solve this case were now very close-lipped. They would not talk to anyone. However, the one critical piece of evidence that was against Shien was the text message between Tongo and him was actually a delusion. These texts from Tongo's phone were allegedly deleted, and the police said that there was actually no computer data of these texts. So at this point, Newling stated to a report on a scene that Tongo had sized up the Dewanis because they were easy marks. He had figured out a fake hijacking so he could rob this couple of their money and all their valuables. Which, when police had recovered stuff from the scene, they found an expensive watch, a white and gold diamond bracelet, a leather purse, and a BlackBerry phone. Which, in South Africa at that time, they had Nokias.
Can't forget the BlackBerry phone.
Yeah.
That's a luxury.
Yeah. So Newling thinks that Tongo's co-conspirators lost control of this fake hijacking and ended up shooting Annie after a failed rape attempt, which we talked about earlier. It was weird that they didn't.
But there was no signs of any sexual assault.
So one of the sources that I read, I only found it one source, so not sure how true it is. I know one of them had said that there was like almost a handprint on like her inner upper thigh. So they think that was probably like the failed attempt, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But there wasn't any like semen recovered from her or anything.
Yeah.
Tongo tried to save himself, incriminating Shien, so he had a lessened sentence, and the police were eager to get tourism back on track. So they jumped on his story, and they may have even coached him to do it. Later in the London courtroom, Vinod and Docha sat in the gallery while Shrien's attorney, Claire Montgomery, described her client's now diminished life. He had become a shell who spent hours playing computer games in a camper van in the parking lot of Formeside Clinic in Bristol, where he was plagued by flashbacks of his wife's killing from the PTSD. The judge then ordered Shien to be relocated to a different mental institute and one that was more open and relaxed. Then he postponed the extradition until July of 2013, which again put his innocence on hold.
Yeah.
At this point, it seems that the initial confession from Manjeni was the most accurate, that it was a robbery with sexual assault gone wrong. The evidence stacked against Shien was circumstantial. Witnesses were too compromised and the motives were too elusive to prove it. The biggest barrier, though, for Shien now was that he was unwilling to go back to South Africa to prove his innocence. After many court orders for extradition, his lawyer kept pushing that he's not fit to stand trial. Shien was then extradited to Cape Town in April. On October 6th is when Shien trials will begin. This is a lengthy trial, so I'll break it down to just the key points of what I thought was important. Again, if you want more information about it, 100% go read about it. On October 6th, he told the Cape Town court that when his wife was murdered, his whole life crashed down, and he also told the court that he was bisexual. Then, on the second day, Kuwait, who had come from prison to testify, stated that he was asked to make it look like a hijacking. The prosecutor also claimed that Shien had been conspired with himself, Tongo, and Kuwait. Then, on April 21st, the court was told that Annie wanted a divorce, as we had said earlier. Then on November 5th, the court was shown the video of Shien meeting with Tongo in the lobby with the money.
Yeah.
Then on November 14th, a gunshot residue expert testified that he casted doubt on the claim that the hitman was Kuwait. He said that they probably accused the wrong man of pulling the trigger. Then, on November 17th, the lawyers of Shien applied for the case to be dismissed. 2 weeks after November 17th, the trial was thrown out by the judge, which he had said that the evidence was too far-fetched and too far below the threshold, and that the testimonies from the key witness had contradictions. What do you think?
I don't know. I still think that Shien has a part in the murder. I think he was part of it. But there's just so many different, like, they're all pointing fingers at each other, and no one's really pointing the finger at Shien. Like, he's trying to act innocent.
Yes.
And, like, I don't know. He's doing a good job at it.
Yeah. So, that's our trial. So, Annie's family felt they had been failed by the justice system. They believed that Shien was still at fault. They consulted with their lawyer so that they could possibly file a lawsuit against Shien in the UK where they lived, rather than where the crime was committed, because they thought they'd have better odds there. Mm-hmm. Then, on December 2nd, the parents of Annie wanted to sue Shien for failing to disclose his bisexual life before the wedding. Shien had not disclosed that he had slept with men to Annie, and Annie's parents would have never let him get married if he would have admitted to sleeping with male prostitutes, basically. They had been instead blindsided by this fact and had asked his lawyers to pursue suing for the cost of the wedding and the cost of losing their daughter. Annie's father had said that the whole wedding was false and he was going to sue him for this. He was not suing for the money, but instead for the loss of his daughter, who left this world for nothing. They clearly stated that they were not homophobic, but they were shocked by his deception about it. They didn't have a choice, and he wouldn't have let his daughter marry a man who slept with other men. But these are Annie's father's words, none of our own. But that's just what he was stating. Is like, he wouldn't have let his daughter marry that man if he would have been open about it.
Yeah.
Which is probably why he didn't disclose it.
Yeah.
I looked at a bunch of articles. There's no updates past this. The last article I found was from 2014. I couldn't see if they ended up filing against Shien, if they won, what happened with that situation. I'm assuming if there wasn't an article about it, they probably didn't. But he also never had that other trial in London. And then as far as we know, the last known court appearance from Shien was his acquittal. This case is technically closed. I mean, we did have our 3 men put away and that were jailed, including Minjeni, who had a life sentence, Kuwait, who also had 25 years, and then Tongo, who had 18 years. The question we come back to, though, is did Shien conspire to kill his wife, or did he have nothing to do with it?
I think he had everything to do with it. I really do.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, just the conflicting statements of him being thrown out of the car, or him being, like, he jumped out of the car and him being dragged out of the car, but not having any bruises, scratches, or anything like that. Like, he willingly stepped out of the car.
Yeah.
Like, so there's that, and then I think he was trying to get rid of his past life and not having to tell Annie, rather than just telling her and separating.
Yeah, going their ways.
Yeah, he just wanted to get rid of her.
Yeah. I don't know. It's hard because there's people that think he's innocent, and then there's also people that think he did it.
Yeah.
And, I mean, Annie's family thinks that he's done it still to this day. They still think that he was guilty and he was the one that conspired to kill him, set it up, and did everything for it.
Yeah. I mean, just from the facts that you've stated, I believe he did. I think
allegedly. You allegedly think he did it.
I allegedly think he did it. Obviously, I don't know. Nobody does.
Only he does, and he won't talk about it.
And he's fine, and he's saying that he is mentally ill, and so he's at a psychiatric unit.
Which, could that be a cop-out?
I believe it is, because he wasn't mentally ill when the murder went down.
But, like I said earlier, too,
he could be grieving.
Grief does crazy things, and trauma does crazy things to the brain.
Yeah. No, it really does.
And if he has, like, predisposition to mental illnesses, if it's in his, like, family, like...
It could be hereditary.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That could also cause it, especially with such a traumatic event.
Yeah.
Unless he was the one that did it. Then he just feel like guilty that he did it.
Only he knows.
Exactly. Any concluding questions that you have? I know that was literally so much information.
No, I don't think I have any questions.
Okay, any last thoughts?
Yeah, the only thing on top of my head right now is everyone listening, if I go missing, it was my wife.
No, it wasn't.
Yes, I do not have any enemies out there.
If I go missing, it's Ty.
No.
Yeah, 100%.
No, it reminds me of like our wedding day when your dad, he stood up to give his speech and he talked about like, what did he say? I can't remember it exactly, but it's like, look at this person. This person is the person most likely to kill you.
No, I'm pretty sure it was like, Ty, Cosette, look at each other. This is the person most likely to kill you.
Yeah. Yeah.
I forgot about that. Anyways, that's all I have for you guys today. So I know this case was a longer one, so thanks for sticking around. Hopefully it wasn't too confusing. I know that there was lots of information and it kind of jumped back and forth, but I also wanted to keep you like on the line and didn't want you to like give you this information about Shien at first, so like you thought he was guilty at the beginning. I kind of wanted it to be a surprise. So hopefully it wasn't too confusing though. Don't forget to follow us on the Insta at darkduo_podcast so you can see our case visuals. There's also a picture of Shien at the court. He looks so different. Look at that too. I thought it was interesting, just like how much he changed in the time from like their wedding day to him at court, which trauma does that. Yeah. Also, if you're guilty, probably also do that.
Yeah.
We don't know which way it is. I'm not going to say one way or the other. But as always, thanks for listening to us, and let's keep Annie in our thoughts today. She was a victim who was gone way too soon. Her family lost her, and we deserve to give her some time in our thoughts today. Thanks again for listening, and we will see you next week with another episode. Be safe this week, and don't forget, as me and Ty like to say,
till death do us part.